quiet, isolated depths of Arizona's wilderness lies Slaughterhouse Canyon, a place few dare to visit after dark. A canyon where the wind doesn't just howl. Some say it carries the agonizing cries of a mother lost to madness, wailing for her children who will never cry back. What happened in this haunted canyon? How did a family's struggle for survival turn into one of the most chilling legends of the American West? Stay with us as we unravel the tragic story of Slaughterhouse Canyon, where desperation led to unimaginable horror. Here, in this rugged canyon, where the wind whistles through the desolate landscape, we find a family isolated in the unforgiving Arizona wilderness during the gold rush. Days turn into weeks as their food runs out. The father ventures out into the wild, promising to return with supplies. But he never comes back. Starvation sets in. The children's cries grow louder. Their mother watches helplessly, her sanity slipping away, until one day, she can't take it anymore. The legend says that it was on that day the true horror of Slaughterhouse Canyon began. But why did the father never return? And what drove the mother to commit such a terrible act? And could it happen to anyone when pushed to the brink? To answer this question, we need to go back to the mid-1800s, during the height of the gold rush. The story tells of a man, his wife, and their children living in a small cabin deep within what we now call Slaughterhouse Canyon. They weren't rich or fortunate. In fact, they were struggling. The father often left for weeks at a time, hunting or prospecting for gold, desperately trying to keep his family fed. But on one of those trips, something went wrong because he never returned. The reasons for his disappearance? No one knows for sure. Maybe he got lost in the vast wilderness. Maybe he fell prey to wild animals, or perhaps he fell prey to the harsh desert environment. The canyon, after all, wasn't a place that forgave mistakes. Without him, the family was left isolated in a harsh, uncaring landscape. And as their food supplies ran out, the hope that their father would return with food began to fade. That's when the real tragedy began. Alone with her children, the mother faced the unthinkable, watching them starve. The days turned into a blur of desperation, and as their cries for food echoed through the canyon, her grip on reality slipped further and further. What started as mere sorrow turned into obsession, delusions, and finally, madness. Her descent into madness wasn't sudden. It was slow, drawn out by hunger, fear, and hopelessness. She likely spent days searching the barren canyon for food, praying for a miracle that never came. As time wore on, her mind fractured under the weight of starvation and the cries of her children. Some versions of the legend say she started to hear voices, hallucinations brought on by starvation and fear. Others say she convinced herself that ending their suffering was the only way to give them peace. And then, in an act of horrifying desperation, she murdered her children. She wandered the canyon, overcome with grief, her mind fully lost. And in her final days, she died alone, forever haunted by what she had done. According to the legend, her spirit remains in the canyon. It's said that if you listen closely on certain nights, you can still hear her anguished cries echoing through the cliffs. The cries of a mother lost to madness, searching for children she'll never find again. But what does this legend really mean for us today? Why do stories like this resonate so deeply, especially in the quiet corners of our mind? The legend of Slaughterhouse Canyon is more than just a ghost story. It's a reflection of the fears we all carry. It speaks to the very human fear of abandonment, isolation, and losing control when faced with impossible circumstances. It reminds us of the fragility of the human mind when pushed to the brink by despair, and how, in the most desperate of times, the instinct to survive could lead us down dark and dangerous paths. Perhaps we see a part of ourselves in the mother's story, a reminder that we all have our breaking points, that sometimes our minds can become our greatest enemy when hope fades. But beyond the fear and tragedy, the story is also a cautionary tale, a reminder that without the means to provide, without hope, and without connection to others, even the strongest among us can be overcome by the darkest parts of ourselves. So the next time you find yourself lost in the wilderness of your own thoughts, remember the legend of Slaughterhouse Canyon. It's not just a ghost story. It's a tale of survival, of madness, and ultimately of the human condition. And if you ever find yourself near Kingman, Arizona, take a moment to pause at the edge of the canyon. Listen to the wind, and maybe, just maybe, you'll hear the distant echoes of a mother's cries, a tragic reminder of how far desperation can take us. If you've enjoyed exploring this dark and fascinating corner of folklore, don't forget to hit subscribe, and join us next time on the Mythic Exploratorium as we travel to northern Minnesota and explore the legend of the Wendigo. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, the truth behind legends is often closer than we think.